Buenos días, mi nombre es Carla Mariana Fernández de la Cruz y soy integrante del Consejo Directivo del Colegio Mexicano de Licenciados en Traducción e Interpretación por el bienio 2021-2023. Les doy la más cordial bienvenida a la sesión 1 de la jornada 4 de la segunda edición del Congreso Internacional de la Semana de la Traducción. Este día tengo el honor de presentar a Julia Poger, quien es una intérprete especializada en negocios, conferencias y asuntos diplomáticos, quien nos va a dar hoy su ponencia titulada Ethics in Remote Simultaneous Interpreting. En el transcurso de la sesión pueden escribirnos cualquier duda o pregunta en el chat para que al término de su disertación la licenciada Julia Poger pueda responderlas. Sin más que agregar, les doy el uso de la palabra a Julia Poger. Julia, the floor is yours. Thank you. And thank you for sharing this with us. I'm sure it will be very interesting.
I hope so. It's lovely to be here, and I'd like to thank the Colegio for having invited me, a non-Spanish speaker, to come and speak to you all today during this week, which I would have attended all sorts of lectures, but I wouldn't have understood most of them. So I'm sorry to not have been able to be actively participating all week. And thank you in particular to Isel for having written to me about this, because it's a great opportunity. I am really excited to talk to all of you, and especially about something that I think a lot of people really need to think about more, at least judging from some of the things that I've been seeing around online and around the world. So here we are in ethics and remote simultaneous interpreting. Just a quick note, I can't see the chat right now unless I want to cover over my slides. So unless I ask you a specific question and ask you to put things in the chat, I won't be able to see anything. If you could hold your questions for after the presentation, I promise I'm only going to talk no more than about 45 minutes. And hopefully it will be so full of stuff that you won't even notice the time going by. And then we can have questions and answers afterwards, if that's okay. But I won't see what's in the chat unless I bring it up special. So just so you know. Okay, so ethics and remote simultaneous interpreting. A huge, vast subject that I'm going to actually touch on all sorts of bits and pieces of it today. Now, I will not be talking about regular interpreting ethics, though that is also a Pandora's box of lots of fun to go through, but I won't be talking about that today. So we won't be talking about you delivering the full fat speech of somebody that you feel is a complete and utter fascist. We're not going to talk about people speaking non-working languages in the meeting. We're not going to talk about somebody trying to get inside your booth while you're working. None of that. We'll only talk about remote simultaneous interpreting. And I wanted to break this talk down into 3 levels, 3 relationships, really. And so ethics and how it touches on your clients, your colleagues, and yourself. And I'm going to start with yourself, because we all like to hear about ourselves first, and we all like to talk about ourselves more than we like to talk about other people, unless it's gossip, but we'll gossip later. It's okay. So anyway, we will start with you. Now, before we get started with you, however, I just wanted to remind you, as if we needed the reminding, but I'm still going to remind you anyway, that our lives changed with COVID. Now, before COVID, there were many of you who were already interpreting online. You were working remotely. In fact, several of you instructed those of us who had never done it before COVID in how to do it and how to set up our home studio.
You're on mute, Julia.
Thank you. I think the host muted everybody, and that included me. So anyway, some of you were like really far ahead of the rest of us then, but most of us were getting work by traveling. We traveled to other countries, we traveled to another city, or we even just got out of bed and traveled to the other side of town, depending on where we were living and where we were working. And that's how we met our clients. And it's how we met our colleagues, and our clients and our colleagues would hire us for other jobs, and so on and so forth. Then COVID hit and we all locked down for a while, and some of us, probably not those who are here, but some of us are actually still locked down. I'm sure you've all heard of what's been going on in China recently. So our whole lives moved to online. We've moved to working online and meeting people online, and I have never seen so many interpreters and translators on social media as I have since 2020. Okay, I've been on social media for over a decade, and suddenly I saw all these people coming in because it was all we had left. So COVID opened the door to all sorts of new possibilities. We could suddenly work for people who are not in our country. We could work with partners who didn't live where we lived. And we also could add on whole new services. I can Zoom host a meeting, for example. I could tech the meeting on Zoom if I needed to. Not that I want to, nor do I wish to do so today, but I could. And so that's an extra service that I could charge for and earn more money. So it did open up a whole bunch of new opportunities. And one of my favorites actually is that interpreters are a little more visible now that we're online. Because even if you keep your camera off, your square is still there. And if you turn off your video, which I'm going to do for just a second right now, you could have your name and your photograph and so on. And so even when those pesky lawyers tell you, everybody who's not talking, turn off your video, your block still has your photograph there, and they see that you're a person and not a computer, which I think is pretty valuable. So, on the other hand, some people were kept up at night because they were out of their mind, terrified. How am I going to earn some money? What's going to happen when I don't have any work? Oh my God, I have to learn how to remote interpret. What am I going to do now? And I'm seeing that prices are going up for things, and at the same time my fees are feeling pressure to go down. What is all of this, and what am I going to do? So it scared a lot of people. And so now we're going to start talking about you. When it scared you, in particular, you have this angel and this devil on your shoulders, always whispering into your ears. I do too. Believe me, we all do. And the angel is saying, don't do anything to undermine the profession of interpreting or translating. Don't do anything, because if you do something, the client is then destroyed for anybody else, because they're going to think everybody can do this thing under really bad conditions or bad prices. Keep your rates up, keep your conditions up. And then you've got the devil on the other side saying, but if everybody else is keeping their rates up, let's lower ours a little bit and try and get as much work as possible, because otherwise, oh my God, what am I going to do with myself, right? So that's what the devil is basically saying in all of our ears, quite frankly. And so what happens? You lower your fees. And I'm saying you, I'm sure that many of you did not, but I'm still going to say you at this point because I need an illustration. So you lower your fees. Now, I have no problem with anybody charging whatever they feel is appropriate for whatever they think the job is. And quite frankly, if I lived in Switzerland, I'd probably charge twice as much as I charge nowadays, because the cost of living in Switzerland is ridiculously high. And if I lived in Mexico, I could probably reduce my rates some, because the cost of living with Mexico, for example, compared to Switzerland is, incomparable. So yes, I would change my rates depending on where I lived, as long as I was covering my costs. Now, do remember, you have to pay for your rent or your mortgage. You have to pay for your kids' education and their schools and their clothes and their shoes, your clothes, your shoes, your medical insurance, your pension. And so if you're lowering your fees lower than can cover all of these costs that you have, that I consider to be unethical. Partly because of what I'm going to say for the rest of this presentation, but also partly because you're undermining what the client thinks we can do and for how much we can do it. So anyway, you lower your fees to lower than what you need to pay for your rent, your mortgage, your school, your clothes, your food, Gosh, I don't think I could go without food. Anyway, and so what do? You decide that you're going to work more because you'll make up in volume what you were losing in pricing. And so you start working more. And you work more for less money, which, is a valid approach. It's one that I've seen all over the world where people start taking more than one job per day. In fact, sometimes 3. And I even heard of one completely crazy person who did 5 once. I'm not sure that they ever did it again. It's either they never did it again or they never mentioned it in my hearing again, one or the other. But anyway, so you work more and you get no time off. And you end up taking, as I just said, more jobs in one day. And there are even interpreters who will just accept every single job every day. And then when some of them clash, they farm out that work to their colleagues. But they're farming it out, do remember, at this lower rate that they've decided to charge. So the colleagues aren't thrilled about the rates, okay? Yeah, they'll work for you, they'll replace you in that time, but they won't be very happy about it. And the clients also may not be happy because they hired you because you're you. And suddenly a different name and a different person and a different relationship of somebody shows up. I have been the colleague who shows up for somebody who farmed out work, and it's not a pleasant place to be, not all the time anyway. But in any case, you take more jobs in one day, and this leads to some very, very specific consequences. One of those consequences, as I've already mentioned, is that the colleagues that are having to work for you are getting less money than they would have had they negotiated the rate themselves. But a second thing is that you are, as they say in England, hoovering up. You're vacuuming up. You're taking all the work, and you're leaving your colleagues with no work at all, or only the work that they can get through you at lower rates. So not only are you harming yourself physically and harming yourself financially, but your reputation is also taking a shot. And if I was the colleague, for example, I only worked that one time for the colleague who farmed out work, and I never did that again because I felt that it was very uncomfortable for me when they started quizzing me as to why the regular colleague didn't show up. I wasn't given a story or anything. I was just told, Julia, I have a job for you. Can you take it? So I was kind of left in the lurch there. So you're creating instability for your colleagues, and you're also decreasing your reputation with those colleagues as well. Now, if we talk about clients and our client satisfaction, I like all these little faces here. There's all sorts of ways that this behavior can also affect your clients. So let's go into a couple of them. One of them is that the jobs overlap. Now, obviously, if you're doing a remote interpreting job, you're going to start early by half an hour at least, because they want to make sure that your connection is fine, they can hear you, they might want to make sure that the delegates' connections are fine and everybody can hear them. You may have to start interpreting a little bit earlier because they need to tell the delegates, okay, this is how you find the interpreting and this is what you do and so on. So you do start earlier than the actual hour that they tell you. And how many of you, and I can just see a show of hands here, how many of you have had meetings that have actually ended every single time at the actual time that they told you they would end? Personally, Many of my meetings go a lot shorter, a lot longer. They aren't actually ending when they tell me they're going to end. And yes, okay, I have an overtime clause in my contract, but at the same time, you can't really just leave. So, well done. We've had one person who raised her hand and admitted to the fact that her meetings go on either longer or shorter than they usually do. But then what happens if your morning job, say going from 10 to 11, and I see more hands raised for that. So what happens if your morning job, which goes from 10 to 11, kind of bleeds over till 12? Okay? And you took it because it was going to be a 1-hour job and you took it alone. Now, personally, I don't ever work alone on remote because God forbid, knock on wood, spit, 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 God forbid my internet goes down in the middle of the meeting and suddenly the meeting can't go on because of my internet. If there's a second one of us, they can pick up the interpreting until my internet can get fixed, or I can get myself onto a phone hotspot or anything like that. You know, if you're alone, you can't do that. So first of all, we pray to the internet gods that they aren't going to disappear on us. And second of all, we keep interpreting. And so finally that 10 o'clock job ends at noon. But your 12:30 job requires you to be in the booth half an hour early at noon. So you're lucky because they're not necessarily overlapping, but you've just done 2 hours straight of working on your own, and suddenly here you are having to start work immediately without even being able to get a cup of coffee. And what happens if they literally do overlap and the first job doesn't end until after the second one has started? How are you supposed to work on that, especially if you accepted both of them on your own? So this, to my mind, is also something that is not ethical. Now, online, you can have some really good relationships, some really nice meetings with people. I have networked online and had marvelous times with these people and worked for people online and had wonderful relationships with them. But because we're all online now, we forget. I mean, for example, right now I'm dressed in a lovely professional top. I have makeup and everything else, but who's to say whether or not I'm wearing pajama bottoms and flip-flops? Okay, I'm not, but who's to say that I'm not, right? Whereas if I went out to work in person, there's no way I would show up in shorts or pajama bottoms and flip-flops. I would always have a suit on. Okay, so we've started to relax because we're online. And what happens is we forget ourselves and we forget the confidentiality of our profession. And the reason that so many people are willing to hire us because meetings are confidential, because they know that that information won't get leaked. And then what do you get? You see an interpreter who leaked this photograph because they were so happy to be in a hub with a console instead of working at home on their computer. But quite frankly, it's still a remote interpreting job. It's just that the remote interpreting platform has been plumbed into the console so that you can just use your regular buttons and so on. This person says, so glad to have a console, it makes a big difference. But I know for a fact that this was a confidential meeting. This was a meeting that was so confidential that the chairman yelled at delegates who had a second person in the room with them that couldn't be seen online, but that had that second person in the room with them. He yelled at them and told them to get them out of the room. And this interpreter posted something that shows the agenda, the notes, and the chairman. The fact that I have erased the information so you can't see it, and I have erased who did it and where, you'll recognize the platform, I'm sure, but still, that person did not. This was out there completely unconfidentially, and this is not appropriate. This is completely unethical. Chief interpreters as well say very much no to social media. Now, I know of at least one chief interpreter who will show up in the booth if they see that you're on social media, because that chief interpreter will go onto social media during the day and check and see who's posting. And that person will go into the booth, pull the interpreter out, and fire them on the spot because they were not hired that day to be on their Facebook account or to post photographs of the meeting. They were not hired for that. And so that chief interpreter will remove them from the booth immediately. Also, I would never show your console or your remote interpreting platform in a photograph online either, because who's to know how secret the negotiations were in trying to decide which platform or which console or which company you were going to hire to do the tech. Okay, so it could have been a real knockdown, drag-out negotiation where people were yelling at each other and screaming and trying to do each other in and backstab and stuff. You have no idea. This is beyond the purview of your job. So I would never, ever show the platform because it could cause problems for everybody, including for the chief interpreter who hired you. I would also not show the conference room, because the conference room tells you a lot about the type of meeting you're in. What happens if, for example, L'Oreal hires you and you give an interpreter's eye view of that room? Well, you've just given industrial information to L'Oreal's competitors, because they will know that L'Oreal had a meeting that day. And because it was in this type of room, maybe it was the scientists talking to each other. Oh my gosh, maybe they're coming out with a whole new product. I wonder what the product is. And maybe you will have shown what the product is also because it would be up front in the room, but it's not released yet. So be very, very careful about what and who show up in your photographs. And if you live in Europe, do remember that GDPR, the whole privacy issue, is a big deal. And you can't actually show people's faces unless you get their permission. See, I blanked out her face here. Another point is that if you are seen to be taking a stand, then it's not necessarily unethical if it's in your private accounts, but if it's in your professional account and you're showing it with photographs of a meeting, that could be a real problem. So let's pretend we're in the United States and it's a meeting on that most totally contentious of issues, pro-life or pro-choice, right? Now, what happens if one side gets up and shows pictures and talks about testimonies, and you tweet or post or whatever, something about that, making it sound like you support that side? Would a client from the other side ever want to hire you? Would they even trust you? Probably not. So as an interpreter, as a professional, you need never to take a stand. And quite frankly, would you want an interpreter who posts something making fun of the delegates and the clients? So in this case, the post was, "A year into COVID and virtual meetings, this is communication at its best." And yes, we've all had the person, who's reading their speech from a piece of paper, who's looking down like this, and you can't see anything about them, right? And it's annoying as all hell. But you're not going to make fun of that client because that client will let people know that that happened at this meeting and that the interpreter made fun of them. Beyond that, they can figure out who you are, quite frankly. So you're not anonymous at all on your social media, even though you think you might be. I've also seen posts on LinkedIn without photographs where people were talking about how a client came onto an interpreting marketplace platform and asked for an interpreter with English, and then all the interpreters or a translator with English, I don't remember which one, and then all the interpreters and translators who had English were like, well, what kind of English? Would you like high-level English or low-level English? Would you like Canadian English or British English? And they were basically making fun. And the poor client thought that they were all serious and started getting very nervous. And do you think that that client is ever going to come back to that marketplace again when they've just been the butt of massive jokes? I don't think so. Now, you can't invite me to talk, especially about ethics and especially about remote things, and not have me talk about this. So I'm hoping everybody was expecting this, and if you haven't heard of it before, you will expect it in the future. We do have to post. We absolutely have to post, because beyond our clients who trust us for our confidentiality, we need our colleagues to know that we are active. We are definitely active. You don't have to show people your booth, your console, the room, the speaker, or anything like that to show that you're active. But if you do want to show something like that, as long as you've asked the client, is it okay to post this photograph or this thing that I'm saying, then you might as well show that you asked the client. Now, the hashtag that I personally made up is hashtag client authorized, spelled with a Z, Z, or an S, as you wish. Other people might say permission granted, others might say client notified, or client asked, or whatever, but somehow show that you have authorization to make the post that you're making if it's about a specific job. Okay, now granted, anybody can write the word client authorized on their post. It's right there. But maybe this client was authorizing this interpreter to show the screens of their meeting, but did they know that this interpreter was putting a sticker on? And quite frankly, what does the sticker mean? I mean, does it mean, oh gosh, this is so easy that I could be doing this as if it were a spa day, right? I could have a facial on, nobody would know, and it's such an easy meeting that it's not a problem. Or is it something like, oh my God, I'm going green, this is a medical thing, I'm going to be sick. This is horrible, why am I here? Or is it so horrible that I'm going to need a spa day later? I have no idea what this means. It is not a clear message. And so be very, very careful about the messages that you put out on social media. It's extremely important. Now I'm going to ask you something, so I'm going to bring up the chat. Always. Okay, so this is a post that I found on LinkedIn, and that's all I'm going to tell you about it. Somebody, the client did authorize me to talk about it, or the person who posted it did authorize me to put this on one of my slides. So it's a court interpreting question. So you're the court interpreter, and you're interpreting on the record in an official court hearing being held on the Zoom conference platform. I'm sure we've all worked on Zoom. We're all on Zoom today. In the middle of the proceedings, one of the parties to the hearing sends you a private message in the Zoom chat. It could be regarding your rendition, or it could be just a greeting because they know you from somewhere. Are there ethical and professional responsibilities at play for you in that scenario? What do you think? And you should put something in the chat. Do you think that it's ethical for somebody to send you a private message, whether it be a greeting or something about a word choice that you made? Not at all. Absolutely no, no. Okay, so what would you do if it's not ethical? If somebody did that, what would you do? That gave me a nice pause. They should address the person in charge and not answer. Exactly. It is not ethical. You could ignore it. You could definitely ignore it. If you don't ignore it, then you would either tell the person in charge, or some people say polite answer, and one other person says ignore in big letters. Okay, thank you for taking part in my little off the record poll here. Redirect it to who could answer. Well, if it's a hello, then there is nobody to redirect it to at that point. But one of the things that I would think about myself is, let's pretend I'm the court interpreter, right? What would happen if I were in person, if this were an in-person event? If one of the lawyers came up to me to say hello, everybody would see it, right? Everybody would have seen it. If the lawyer would have slipped me a note to say, you're using the wrong word, you should use this word, everyone would have seen that happening. Zoom means that nobody would see it because it's private. So personally, I would make it public in a polite way, right? Even if it was just a greeting. Well, if it was just a greeting, I would say, please address me only through the main platform. Hello, but please address me only through the main platform, and I will ignore any future messages. You have to have, really, as Mariana says, you have to have very specific protocol, logistics, and planning. You have to know who you should notify it to and how you should notify it. When we are working as conference interpreters and the sound is bad, we need to hear from the chief interpreter exactly what we're allowed to do and exactly what we should say into the mic. This would be the same exact thing. You would need to know exactly whom to address and how to address them. Would you tell, for example, the judge in a private message? Or would you stop the proceedings and say, excuse me, however, I would like to bring to the court's attention that. Right. So there's all sorts of different thoughts that are going through your mind. And these are the hardest things to think about because you really don't know who to go to until you're actually in the situation and you see that there is a judge or a magistrate or two parties or not, and you see exactly who you can talk to. You might ask your client ahead of time, or in some cases, your jurisdiction may have a handbook for court interpreters that will spell out a lot of what you have to do. So that was my little case study, and I'd be happy to talk about any other case studies when we get to the Q&A. Now, the last two topics, or the last one big topic that I wanted to bring up in the part of ethics and remote simultaneous interpreting, I have to say that this also holds for in-person simultaneous interpreting as well. Okay, and in-person consecutive and so on and so forth, just so you know. But this is a really big thing, especially with remote, because you never know who's recording or broadcasting unless you come onto Zoom like we all came on for this session, and the first thing you heard was session is recording. Thank you, Zoom, for letting us know things like that. But who's to say that I'm not using a screen recorder right now and recording this entire session too, right? So you never know what's happening, okay? Not to worry, but I'm just saying, you never know what's happening. So what are our considerations here? Well, there's slightly different between recording and broadcasting, so let me go through them. So with recording, I'm sure many of you already know this, but I'm still going to go through it anyway because it never hurts to hear it more than once and from more than one person. So if somebody is recording, you need to know about that, okay? It is in international law, and not everybody realizes this, but it is international law, international copyright law, that you own your rendition. Okay, this could be for translating as well, but specifically in interpreting, you own your voice and your rendition of any kind of speech that you are interpreting. So you are required to be notified that you are being recorded. They also need to notify you why you're being recorded, right? So why you're being recorded. If it's for internal purposes only, for example, oh, well, this is how we do our minutes of the meetings. We don't bother having anybody take notes. We just save the file on a disk and we just put it away in the filing cabinet somewhere. You can't really charge for anything. However, if they are making money from that recording, let's pretend you interpreted this particular presentation, but for me, I hired you to do that. I'm such a good person that way. But then I want to send this presentation out to 6 other places using your recording for the interpreting. I'm making money off of that. So you should make some money off of that too. Now, I've heard of people charging a nominal fee. I've heard of people charging anywhere between 20% and 100% of the interpreter's fee. I usually charge 100%. I've come down to 50%, but that's as low as I go personally. But this is what I do for recording. And you should realize that this is a very big deal. And if you waive your right, excuse me, let me just take a quick sip. If you waive your right to the recording, you may be waiving other rights that you didn't know about at that time as well. So never waive the right. Always be told if you're being recorded, and then you may decide whether or not you want compensation for that recording. But that will be then up to you and not up to your client. So that's recording. That's important. Now, broadcasting is a separate issue. Broadcasting is, for example, a foreign dignitary comes to your country, he's doing a press conference, you're interpreting that press conference, and 3 different news stations are going to be broadcasting your rendition. Now, on the one hand, you could not charge them because it's in the public interest to know what this person is saying. On the other hand, you would be in your rights to approach them and to tell them that according to international copyright law, you have the rights to your voice and they do not have the rights to your voice, so they need to pay you a consideration to be able to use your voice. That is, again, up to you. And I know one woman who did do that at a press conference and who basically made somewhere between 3 and 5 times her daily fee because she also, she went to 3 to 5 different news companies and said, look, you're using my voice without my permission. Somebody needs to pay me for that. If you're working for the UN, they will tell you, it is in our overall contract, that you don't get paid to be streamed. You will not be recorded, but you will be streamed. And there are some city councils, for example, that for accessibility reasons need to broadcast the interpreting, live streaming it for accessibility reasons by law. In those cases, you cannot charge. You cannot charge. However, there is something that you can do. Whoops, let me get past that. And that is have a disclaimer. You need a disclaimer. Please take a screenshot of this because it won't stay up for forever. Okay? And this disclaimer is a legal sentence basically telling your listeners that you do not bear legal responsibility either for the material that is being said that you are interpreting or for any mistakes that you may make. Okay, now the one on top is the one that I use for myself, but I took it from a UN organization that puts this up on the page. So you've got like YouTube, right? And then you've got a disclaimer underneath it. It's not YouTube, but you see what I mean, how it looks. And the disclaimer will be underneath it somewhere. It may be on the registration page so that you've seen it when you register to go and then you don't see it again. It may be on your ticket when you buy the ticket to go to this thing. It may be somewhere, but it needs to be somewhere. And I put that in my contract, that there needs to be a disclaimer. Okay. Now, I got a friend of mine who's a wonderful Spanish translator and interpreter to translate my disclaimer into Spanish for you so that you could have it. It's very important to have something like this, because what happens if Elon Musk talks about share prices and you get the numbers wrong? Suddenly the share prices in your country of his companies are going to go plunging, and it's your fault. It literally is your fault because you got the number wrong. But with a disclaimer like this, what you're saying is only Elon Musk talking is the authentic stuff. And if anybody else wants to, if anybody wants to go to the source, talk to Elon Musk. The interpreter is just here to facilitate your understanding of what's going on. So this is extremely important. Now, one last super important thing, and I should have put this slide after the one I just showed you, is it's one thing for them to stream you. Okay, if it's in your contract, you've been notified, you've received a consideration or not, depending on the legal situation that you are in at that moment, that's fine. Okay, and especially, if they're notifying you. If they don't notify you, that's not fine, and you can certainly have a hissy fit of some sort, though in a polite, professional way, please. You could even sick your lawyer on them if you wanted to. But in general, it is okay for them to ask you if they can stream your rendition. It, however, is not okay for you to stream your rendition on your own without asking anybody else about it. Okay. I say this because of two facts. One is that, yes, you do own your rendition, but you do not own copyright on the ideas that you are interpreting. Yours is a derivative work. So the person who actually gets the royalties is the person whose ideas you are interpreting. So they are not your ideas. You don't get to do it. This is why you must ask your client if you can post something on social media. So on my website, on my juliapoger.com website, and on LinkedIn, I have 3 different samples of my interpreting. I got them they were posted online already without asking me, from something that had been done. And I asked the clients, would it be okay if I included them on my website and on my social media? And they all said yes, as long as I mentioned who the client was and so on and so forth. So that was fine. But the second point is that I have seen so many interpreters say, well, I own my rendition, so I'm going to use it for advertising. And they'll go on Instagram Live, for example, and they'll turn it on while they're interpreting so that everybody out there can hear how, yeah, I know, I'm seeing a couple of raised eyebrows here, so that everybody can hear how good they are. Now, on the one hand, this is illegal because the people who were at the meeting that this person was interpreting paid to go to that meeting. There's copyright on the ideas, and so this person could have been sued. If they were in the United States and the original person heard them, they would have definitely had their butt sued immediately. But the second thing that happens is you start looking to see how many people are following me. Ooh, look, the numbers are going up. Ooh, they're going down. What's going on? Why? Am I doing a bad job? Oh, look, they're going up again. Ooh, and you forget you're interpreting. And then this one person that I saw who did this, I mean, I saw this and heard this with my own ears, did such a bad job on their interpreting because they were so focused on how many people were listening to them that, that it ended up being an anti-advertisement for themselves. So both for stupidity reasons and for legality reasons, you cannot broadcast your rendition of your interpreting without asking anybody about it. Okay? And that's it for my formal presentation. So take a quick screenshot if you need that. I'm on LinkedIn, I'm on Twitter, I'm on Instagram, but I'm mostly on LinkedIn and Twitter. And my Know Your Worth seminar page, where we have all sorts of different seminars that are listed there and described. I'd be more than happy to see you there. I'm taking the slide down now just in case, if anybody hasn't got their shot, and stopping sharing. Okay.
Yeah. Thank you so much. We can now start with the Q&A session. First of all, we have a comment. It says, it's about the fees. It says, not quite, because in Mexico we earn in pesos, but the cost of life is in dollars. This is by Villa Gomez. And then we have another comment, also regarding fees, by Conrado, which says, it seems to me that a winning formula is a combination of profit margin, volume of words to be translated or processed, and recurrence in customer repurchase. And now we have a question by Mariana Santiago. It says, would you suggest prioritizing your reputation over customer loyalty or recurrence, specifically for interpreters?
That's interesting, actually. And could Mariana maybe come on and explain what she had in mind with that? Because customer loyalty and my reputation usually go hand in hand, but I'd like to hear if they don't and when they don't.
Okay, Mariana, could you please raise your hand so that I can unmute you? Or maybe we can go to the next question and go back to this one. So this is my Maribel, a comment also regarding workload. I've never charged on volume of words, always on duty timing, but it's a good idea.
Okay.
And another question by Mariana. In your professional expertise and experience, how many clients do you think will add up to sustained profit?
Okay. So that question isn't quite in the area of ethics, but I'm happy to answer it anyway, because it's me and I'm happy to have long-winded answers to short questions, as always. How many clients would add up to sustained profit? You can't really tell. If I were selling a product on Instagram, I don't need millions of clients to buy that product. I need about 100 people who are rabid fans. And that, which sounds really small, doesn't it, when you're talking about Instagram, for example. If you have a rabid fan and they have a lot of work, then all you really need are 2 or 3 clients. Whereas if you have people who only hire you once in a blue moon because, oh, well, this year we have a meeting, but we've never had one before and we may not have another one next year, then, that's a problem too. Now, the only caveat that I would say is that I did have that wonderful raving fan client. When I used to live in the United States, I worked a lot for State Department. And it was very unusual for them to have an American native English speaker with a Russian bee, that's my main language combination, who could explain taxes and the education system because I went through the education system, because I went through paying my own taxes in the United States. So they really liked me and they had me working 200 days a year, and so on and so forth. Have you ever heard about times when the US government actually shuts down? Well, that happened when they owed me about $20,000 and I wasn't getting paid for a couple of months because they shut down the government and then they had to catch up with everybody. So having that one rabid fan is not a help when suddenly they shut down for whatever reason that might be. Okay. Now, depending on your language combination and the country that you're from, okay, in Mexico, it's definitely different than what my language combination is. But for example, when Russia went into Crimea, I lost a whole bunch of clients. Back in 2008, or 2014, excuse me, I lost a whole bunch of clients then that have never come back because they just won't have dealings with Russia anymore. And even more so nowadays. So my languages are much more geopolitically based. If your languages are more economically based, then you need to take account of what's going on in the economy and so on. And I would recommend that you have at least 3 rabid fans or, 10 clients that give you more than 1 day of work a year, that have regular stuff. But again, I'm sure you've all heard of the Pareto principle, the 80-20 principle. 80% of your work will come from 20% of your clients, and 20% of your work, will come from 80% of your clients. Yeah, you want to work for that, 20% of clients that gives you 80% of work, and the rest of them are kind of like the cherry on top of the cake. I like that Mariana liked that one. Okay, so that was my long-winded answer to that very short question. Yay. Mariana, were you the one who asked the question earlier that I needed the explanation for? Can you be unmuted? There you are.
Thank you so much for your presentation. I think it was really good. I actually explained it on the chat. Just by, for instance, you specifically stated that there was like a minimum low that you would go to when it comes to like lowering your price. My question would be, for instance, if you have this rabid fan that all of a sudden would say, hey, I need you to lower your price for whatever reason, that would be way below what you're willing to go. Let's say like for the sake of, he's been your client for 10 years or like 15 years. You're like, okay, I'll do it this one time just to honor, our client commitment relationship. And if word spreads out, then the rest of your clients may want that from you. And this is a conundrum, right? Like you did it to honor a specific professional relationship, but now it's working against you.
Okay.
So I was just because to me that's an ethical thing,
It is an ethical thing. It is absolutely an ethical thing.
Thank you.
In remote interpreting as well as in in-person interpreting, I feel it's unethical to receive a fee that is below what you can live on for what you're doing. And if I had a rabid fan client, and I have, where I had to increase my rates and they were like, oh my God, no, I can't pay that. I've worked with them. I've explained it to them. We've talked it over and we figured out how they can do it. Okay, it doesn't necessarily, and do remember, and I'm giving you a little tiny taste of my know your worth mentality here. Do remember that the value that they pay you in doesn't necessarily have to be money. Okay, we're not talking barter, but it might be worth your while to do that particular job because it puts you in touch with X million people that could use you later. But then see, I would do it for free. I wouldn't charge less. It's either free or it's my, but I do have a floor below which I will not go. And, obviously. Okay. So those were those 2 questions. Certainly. Thank you.
Okay. Now, by Mariana, when you spoke about what you show on your pictures, the examples you shared are at a sweet spot that might not be common for all interpreters.
True.
Do you have any other advice for terms who haven't got a chance to play in big arenas?
Yes, I have a feeling this is Mariana as well, because she's smiling. It's true, but I only show what I've seen and what I know for a fact. Okay, I can't show what I've seen from the Mexican market because I don't work on the Mexican market and I don't speak Spanish and I wouldn't understand what you were posting anyway. So, in that sense, no. But for example, the one with the sticker on it, right, with the green spa face that I showed you, where I said, yeah, they said client authorized, but who knows? That one was somebody who doesn't play in the big arenas, who has very good clients and happens to just do, a medical conference or a webinar on something or something else. I mean, these are meetings that happen all over the place. They don't have to be with international organizations. The one where the person is taking a stand could have been in any venue that you like. It didn't, it doesn't have to be in an international organization. The top ones, that the first couple that I showed you definitely were, but it's the principle of the thing that I was going for. The fact that it was a confidential meeting and the interpreter still showed confidential information on their feed. Now, I'm sure you guys have confidential information all the time that you're not showing on your feed. And if you are showing it, you will stop as of right now. But it was more the principle of the thing rather than where those pictures were actually taken. It's just I happened to be following these particular people, so I saw those pictures and took screenshots. If any of you happen to see anything and you want to send them to me, I'm more than happy to replace those screenshots with different ones, but or to add to my collection. But if they're in Spanish, you'll have to tell me what they say.
Thank you, Julia. We have a comment by Tadeo Romero regarding the disclaimer. We do really appreciate this great information.
Good.
And
Good.
now a comment from Regina. Regarding questions not related to ethics. Well said. I love the fact that you've spoken with such candidness. I really appreciate it. And a question from Andres Valdez. Are interpreters part of the ATA?
Yes, they are actually. The American Translators Association, they are members. I am a member. I am an active member. And in fact, I was one of the people who lobbied for them to allow interpreters to be active members without having to take that horrible translation test, because I do not translate. And I was really, really pissed off about the fact that they were disenfranchising me just because I do not put pen to paper for translating. I don't think translation is a lesser thing at all. I think translation is pretty amazing, and I certainly am not good enough to do it. I'm only good enough to interpret. And so finally they did allow us in, and it was about a little over 20 years ago that we were able to become active members. So you can now apply and tell them that you're an interpreter and give them proof that you've been working as an interpreter for a certain amount of time. It's some kind of professional activity thingy, and they'll let you in as active members. So there.
Now by Carlos Baeza. Since we are humans and are prone to get sore throats, family urgencies, car breakdowns and the like, what is the best way to let the client know we have a side or replacement interpreter on top of the other interpreter in the booth and might show up with very short notice during the contract or payment discussions, or paper, or just brought during the conversation?
When I use a contract, specifically a contract, which I don't use all the time. I always use with lawyers. Okay, always with lawyers. But sometimes I'll just have conversations and then reflect the conversation back in an email, and that becomes our contract, for example, as long as all of the details are there. But usually it'll be part of that conversation, or it will be in my formal legal contract that if the interpreter is unable to make whatever meeting it is for whatever reason, that the interpreter will either replace themselves with somebody of the same quality or better. I always choose people who are better than me. And we'll run this by the client to make sure that the client is okay with the choice. basically. That's not my actual wording, but you see what I mean there. So that's in my actual contract. And then if there's a chance, like nowadays, for example, let's say a private client were to contact me, nowadays it would have to come up in the conversation because God only knows if I'll come down with COVID or Chris will come down with COVID, and then I'm going to have to quarantine too because, you know, we live together and even self-isolating isn't going to help. Or a volcano goes up, or, you know, which stopped Europe for weeks at one point, or there's a terrorist attack on my local airport, which has happened as well. You know, because of all of these really weird things that have been going on over the last few years, I would definitely bring it up in the conversation and just say, apart from the team, I do have somebody on standby just in case. That you do not have to pay them unless they are the ones who replace one of us. But are you okay with that? And then you're letting them know ahead of time. But I'm a huge proponent of tell everybody everything all the time. Okay? This does not mean that I'm going to tell everybody, oh, I woke up at noon yesterday. Wasn't that wonderful? Because it has nothing to do with the job today. But if somebody comes up to me and says, you know, you haven't really, you know, you've been doing a great job, but your colleague isn't brilliant or something. Okay, there I might not say anything. That's not a great example. But, okay, when I worked at a summit and the first lady of another country, gee, I wonder which one, said that she liked a wallet I had because it had extra pockets in it. And back then we didn't have lots of wallets with extra pockets, okay? This is pre-internet, deal with it. Anyway, you know, I then let the other first lady know what happened so that the other first lady had a chance to then buy her a gift if she wanted to. You know, so I don't, you know, if I interpreted a conversation between my dad and a professor from another country, and my dad asked, so when did you get to town, thinking I was going to answer, and I interpreted it because it's all, everybody at the table needs to know what's going on. You know, every single time I will tell the agency when we finished, I will tell my client, you know, what went right and what needs to be improved for next time on the Zoom hosting, for example, whatever. But I will always talk to people about stuff. This particular thing, because it affects the material conditions of my work, I would bring up in a conversation or in the formal contract. But anything that doesn't affect the material, you know, part of it will happen after the job's over, for example.
We have Daniela Núñez. First of all, I would like to thank you for all the knowledge you shared with us today. It's an honor to hear all your advice and wisdom. Now, my question is, what would be your recommendations for an interpreter who has interpreted before, but is relatively new as a freelancer and does not know where to start?
Take my class. No, I'm kidding. But actually, I'm not kidding. But one of the things I can recommend, I'm going to put it in the chat to everybody, is actually I'm going to go online first and I'm going to find the address because, you know, hell if I remember it offhand. Okay, so for those of you who don't know, I am a co-director of the Cambridge Conference Interpretation course, which is a 2-week boot camp for practicing conference interpreters. Happens every year in August. We still have room for Spanish if anybody wants. German, Italian, Russian. There we go. But anyway, so this is the website, but this is the specific tab on that website with texts. Now, you may know this already, but I'm still going to tell you, I am married to a saint. His name is Chris Guichot-de-Fortis. He is a wonderful man. I love this man dearly. He is also an interpreter, a staff interpreter, former staff interpreter, retired at NATO, so brilliant. and he's been teaching for donkey's years. And he's written several articles. Some of those articles are on this page with these texts. Please download this now, because if you're thinking you're going to get it from the chat, you may not. I don't know. But please take that now. And one of the texts he has there in English and in French is getting started. Oh my God, I have my degree and what do I do now? Kind of thing. And I really recommend that you take a look at that. There's a lot of really good information in there. It is a tiny bit Belgium-centered, because this is something that we give a lecture on to all of our Belgian students at the end of the school year. We just had it a couple of weeks ago. And so there will be a couple of articles in there in the English version, maybe not in the French version, or check them both because they aren't exactly the same, on how to set up a business in Belgium, for example. But it'll at least tell you what you need to know. And then beyond that, there's a fabulous article also on the same page in German and in English by a different Julia that was so valuable that I asked her if we could post it on this website, because I refer to it all the time. And she's German, and she's talking specifically about how you should charge, what you should charge, and what the components are of your rate. So what are you actually paying for? So it's not just your rent and your food and your clothes, but it's your medical insurance. You live in the States, that's enormous. You know, it's your pension fund. It's your taxes. It's all sorts of stuff that you need to keep in mind so that you're not just charging, oh, well, I can do this because I wasn't going to work anyway. I can do this for some ridiculously low amount of money. Okay, so I recommend that you go to that website and take a look at all of the texts, because they could be helpful to any of you. And if you're working on your B language, there's a brilliant B language text there too, you know, how to improve your B language, which works really, really well.
Thank you, Julia. I'm sure this will be very useful. We have now a question by Stephanie Cervantes. What if an interpreter is not interpreting everything that is being said in court or conference? Who would notice this?
I would notice. Well, anybody in the audience who has both languages would notice. Okay. The press might notice if they were there, and let me just say that they are all over this. It depends on which country you're in, but I still remember a story where the US president showed up in a certain country, I'm not going to say which, but not Mexico, had given his speech to the interpreter, got off the plane, started giving the speech, the interpreter sight translated. So you all know that. So sight translated the speech. And then the president went off-piste and decided to ad-lib. And the interpreter kept sight translating, which means did not say what the president said. Can I just say, torn apart in the press the next day. That interpreter never worked for the president again, and so on and so forth. So you never know who will notice and who won't notice. Okay, and even if they correct you, because this has also happened, there are so many, I mean, I don't know if this happens with Spanish, but with Russian, it happens all the time. You get people who think that they know what you want to say, and so they're giving you the words even when they're wrong. And so what I have learned to do is not to get upset and to just say thank you for their suggestion and keep going with whatever I thought it was, or thank them if they really were helping me, because later on I'm going to sock it to them when I do a brilliant job on something else that they will have no idea how to put. So, you know, you really never know. And in fact, I know interpreters who will often, you know, sit down in the mic and look around and say, okay, I don't see anybody wearing headsets. And they'll say, is there anybody listening to my booth, you know, to the Spanish booth? And if you are, please turn towards the booth so I can see that you're there. And nobody turns, and they think nobody's listening, so they don't interpret. But what if somebody was out of their line of sight? What if somebody was in the corridor? What if somebody had gone off to the bathroom, to pee and missed it and came back, and then suddenly there's no interpreting? So you have no idea who could notice and who couldn't notice. And it's not your job. Your job is to interpret and to interpret everything.
Thank you. Now, by Arturo Miranda, do you have any tips on how to overcome anxiety and nervousness when interpreting?
Let me look at this one other thing too. Chris also has in those texts a thing on, let me just look if it's there or not. It's not. Okay, so going to look for the YouTube channel. Sorry. But he had a presentation at the TERP Summit. Oh God, it's not coming out. Hang on. He had a presentation at the TERP Summit. There we go. Which was on stress and expert performance. And I posted it with the TERP Summit's permission because it got so many watches and so many likes and so on that I asked if I could post it on our channel. So I'm just going to look for my videos and get you the link to that particular thing now. Because again, as I said, I am married to a saint. He's amazing, and he really thinks about these things. Now, the thing that you need to know, here we go. How do I share that? Okay. Get shareable link. Now, if you go to our YouTube channel, there's also a presentation on B languages and a presentation on something else as well. So that right there is Chris's talk on the growth mindset. It's in the chat, so copy that out now. It's on the growth mindset, and it will talk to you about stress and anxiety. But the thing that there are two things that I can say about it. One is, if I don't have some stress, I will do a bad job. Okay, I know this for a fact, having done a bad job when I didn't have some stress. So I know this for a fact. So some stress is good stress. And the second thing is, stop thinking about yourself and get out of your own way. Okay? Who's speaking and who are they speaking to? And why are they speaking? So if somebody happens to be interpreting me right now, they shouldn't be thinking about themselves. They should be thinking about the message that I'm trying to deliver to you because I'm trying to help you. And the more they think that they're helping you by delivering my message, the less they're thinking about, oh my God, how am I doing? Oh my God, am I doing a good job? Am I actually saying what she's saying? Is she too fast for me? Am I leaving things out? Things like that. So, and I apologize if I'm too fast. I'm trying not to be. You should be really happy Chris isn't here. So those are the two pieces of advice that I would have about anxiety and stress. One, you need some of it. And two, get out of your own way.
Thank you, Julia. We have this one now by Stephanie Cervantes. Why do you feel you wouldn't be a good translator if you do great as an interpreter? Is it about being on the one-to-one out of an office?
I'm looking for the book I translated. It's not here. It is here somewhere. It's hidden. It's okay. I don't want to show it to you. I did a bad job. No, I think it's... First of all, it took me 1.5 years to do a book that was only like this thick. If I was getting paid to do that, I couldn't live on it. I am incredibly slow and because I don't do it for a living, right? If I did it for a living, I'd get faster. But when somebody gives me a translation, it has to be somebody that I've served as an interpreter that I know what they want. I know exactly what they want, and maybe I can get someone to help me on it, so it's not all me. This book was all me, and it took me well over a year and a half. It was horrible, horrible, horrible. And not because the topic was bad or anything. It was really interesting, but just having this thing hanging over my head for a year and a half was terrible. And my rates would have to be something like $1,000 a word for me to even break even on how much time it takes me to translate. I am a born interpreter.
A comment by Carlos Baeza regarding agreeing on replacement interpreters. It says, thank you. It's a great idea to bring it during conversations and then mention that in an email to make it tangible. Excellent presentation, by the way.
Thank you.
And a comment by Maribel. Thank you for your conference. It gave me a valuable approach to the ethics on RSI.
Oh, good.
Another comment by Maria Elena Cruces. Julia, thank you very much for sharing your experience. Great presentation. And a question by Ro Lopez. Do you think it is better to focus on one thing, only interpreting or translating, rather than doing both of them?
No, I think it's better doing both of them if you're capable of doing both of them and earning a living doing both of them. Okay, if you're not able to earn a living doing one or the other, then don't do that thing. But if you're capable of earning a living through COVID, through slow times, it's the translating that's keeping interpreters going. Okay, and so and maybe through slow times in translating, it's the interpreting that's keeping the translating going. I highly recommend having a second income stream if you are an interpreter, especially if you have my languages, because again, losing half of your clients because of something that had nothing to do with you and everything to do with some idiot who's the head of a country and the only country that really speaks your language, you need a second income stream. And if I were a good translator, that would have been what I would have fallen back on. Unfortunately, I'm not. So maybe fortunately, because if I were a translator, I probably wouldn't have started Know Your Worth, and I probably wouldn't have started giving webinars like this.
Julia, thank you so much for taking the time to prepare this presentation and sharing it with us. We have many, many comments thanking you. And you were able to explain in a very nice and clear way points that are extremely valuable to our profession. It's an honor to have the opportunity of learning from you, so thank you so much for that.
Thank you guys for all of your fantastic questions, because I left, 45 minutes specifically for you to come out with stuff, and you did.
Thank you.
Yeah.
And now I will invite the participants to follow the rest of the sessions in the Congress. Muchas gracias. Thank you, Julia.
Thank you all for coming, and thank you for your wonderful comments.
Thank you.